Here we go. Here we go. This is the Mop Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you so much for finding me. It's been a sad 2 weeks. We lost a great filmmaker to violence. There was the massacre in Australia and, of course, at Brown University. This time of year accentuates loss and sorrow. The cold, distant sunlight seems to suggest things will only get worse, but the fact is the days are actually getting longer. We're starting to get more sunlight now that we've moved past the winter solstice. Unless, of course, you live in Australia or New Zealand, which for some reason decided they wanted to be different. So now they're celebrating the Christmas holidays during summer. I don't know how or why they do this, but if you watch videos from New Zealand or Australia, this time of year, they've actually manipulated the weather so it feels and looks like summer on Christmas Day. Seems like a waste of time and energy and money to manipulate the climate just to stick it to the rest of the world. I mean, I don't know. What is Australia and New Zealand trying to do? Hey, look at us. It's summertime down here. Aren't we special? Anyway, for normal countries that don't need to prove anything by changing the seasons, for normal countries, spring will be upon us sooner than you think. And you know what that means? We'll all be 3 months older and that much closer to death. So, as Donald Trump said to Mike Pence on January 6, hang in there. I always tell my kids, it doesn't matter that you got knocked down. What matters is having the wisdom to know not to get back up. Stay down. That's what I always tell my kids. Stay down, because if you get back up, then they'll only start hitting you again. So yeah, it's exhausting. Trump, winter, Trump, the tragedies, Trump, the holidays, and of course, worst of all, the absolute worst part is the loved ones. Don't misunderstand me. I love my loved ones, but I have to ask, I love my loved ones, but do I have to spend time with them? Isn't it enough just to love someone? Do you have to be around them, especially this time of year? So if you're not depressed right now, you're either a sociopath or a Republican, which, as you all know, is one and the same. And I do mean that. I really do. That's not a joke. I mean that. MAGA is an entire political movement comprised of people who all decided the only way they can ever feel normal is by joining a party of sociopathic bullies. Now, next year, as the midterms approach, I'll try to pick off Republican voters by not calling them crypto-fascists with unresolved childhood trauma, like this guy, Bobby Kennedy Jr. I mean, they are crypto-fascists with unresolved childhood trauma. I know, though, we have to win in 2026, and you don't get people to your side if they know how much contempt you actually have for them. So next year, I'm going to be nice to Republicans. However, I'm not so sure being nice to them even works. I think they see that as weakness. Kamala Harris thought she could court Republican voters. Remember, she tried that by being nice to Liz Cheney, and it didn't quite work. I mean, it worked with Liz Cheney and her father. They voted for Harris. But in the end, after all that sucking up to disenchanted Republicans, Kamala Harris got 6.8 million fewer votes than Biden got in 2020. That's because there are what they call moderate Republicans who last year said they couldn't stand Donald Trump, but they hated Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party a whole lot worse. Yeah, they hate Trump. They think he's grotesque, but they hate multiculturalism or pluralism or wokeism or whatever word they use to disguise the fact that they really hate strong, smart, powerful black women more than they hate Donald Trump. On the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, Ralph Nader just interviewed Sam Rosenthal. He's the author of a new autopsy on the Democratic Party. He's with Roots Nation, and he wrote this autopsy on the 2024 presidential election. You can read it over at democraticautopsy.org, and you can hear Ralph Nader's conversation with Sam Rosenthal by downloading the Ralph Nader Radio Hour wherever you get your audio. As you know, after losing a big presidential election, traditionally political parties will pay for what they call an autopsy, that's what they call it, to examine what went wrong to make sure they don't repeat the same mistakes. After the 2012 presidential election, where Obama got reelected and Mitt Romney, who wasn't quite as big a liar as Donald Trump, but Romney told some really big ones, Romney was defeated. So after Romney's 2012 loss, Reince Priebus, then chairman of the Republican Party, ordered an autopsy. And the conclusion reached from it was Republicans had to do a better job at being more inclusive, especially when it comes to the Hispanic voter. So taking that to heart, the next candidate Republicans nominated in 2016 was Donald Trump, who won the nomination by calling Mexicans drug dealers and rapists. Reince Priebus, who commissioned that autopsy calling on the party to be more inclusive towards Hispanics, well, he quietly urged Trump to drop out of the race several times before and after being nominated, but Trump persevered and somehow won the Electoral College, thank you, Vladimir Putin, just not the popular vote. And Reince Priebus became Trump's first White House chief of staff. He only lasted 189 days. So after last year's disappointing results, the Democratic Party conducted an autopsy, and they promised to make it public last week. We were promised we would see the results of the autopsy. But last Thursday, Ken Martin, the chairman of the DNC, who I like, I do like this guy, he announced the results of that autopsy will not be made public. He said doing so would only serve as a distraction, allowing the media to focus on internal squabbling instead of next year's midterms. Just as well, because the autopsy wasn't a real autopsy. When it was commissioned, the people conducting this examination, this forensics exam, they were forbidden from looking into anything Kamala Harris or Joe Biden did wrong. In other words, we want you to determine the cause of death, but you can't look at the corpses. That's basically what this autopsy was. Leaked excerpts of this phony autopsy suggests the blame falls squarely not on the candidate, but the people working for the candidate, but not the people working directly for the candidate at the tippy top, not David Plouffe or Kamala Harris's brother-in-law, Tony West. No, according to this carefully contrived autopsy intended not to offend the assassins, the problem was at the grassroots level. Field organizers, according to leaked excerpts, were more concerned about quantity, the number of doors being knocked, as opposed to the quality of the doors being knocked on. According to this Democratic Party autopsy, the problem last year wasn't that Kamala Harris surrounded herself with corporatists like her brother-in-law Tony West or David Plouffe. The problem was with the doors. The problem was with the doors that were being knocked on. It seems, according to the autopsy, the problem was the quality of the interactions grassroots organizers had with voters in swing states. Not the candidate, not the message. The candidate and the message, according to the autopsy, were perfect. The problem was with how the people at the bottom of the food chain delivered that perfect message and how they sold their perfect candidate. That's the problem. To put it more concisely, The party that calls itself pro-labor blamed the workers for last year's loss. Management at the top, they had it all under control. It was those damn workers who sabotaged the campaign. Well, this is the problem with rich people being in charge. With rich people, the buck stops here, but only literally. Figuratively, they pass the buck. They blame everyone but themselves. Look over there. Don't blame Kamala Harris, who is actually right now signaling another run for president. Would I vote for her again? In a heartbeat, if that's my only choice, if she's my only choice. But good luck with that. I don't think she's ever won a primary. So, as I said earlier, next year I'm going to be nicer to Republicans in the hope they will come over to my side. Thing is, they won't. According to Sam Rosenthal's conversation, he's with Roots Nation, Sam Rosenthal's conversation with Ralph Nader on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, which you can download as a podcast. According to Sam Rosenthal, one of the biggest mistakes Kamala Harris made was courting disenchanted Republican voters by campaigning more with Liz Cheney than she did with AOC or Bernie. So I said this immediately after we lost, but Rosenthal's autopsy for Roots Nation looks at cold, hard data. I was going on instinct. His report says the Harris campaign turned its back on the Democratic Party's traditional base, which is the working class voter, which explains why 6.8 million Biden voters turned their back on her. She ended up losing all the swing states that Biden won. It was pretty bad last year. Georgia, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and even Nevada. She lost Nevada, which a Republican presidential candidate hasn't won in 20 years. She also lost North Carolina, despite the down-ballot Democratic candidate for governor, Josh Stein, winning his election. So we've been over this before, but now there's cold, hard data to back it up. We've been over the losses, not the why, and DemocraticAutopsy.org from Roots Nation gives us the why, the data. So, been over this before, but it's worth going over again. Every state highlighted here in this map, except for North Carolina, is a key swing state that Joe Biden won, but Kamala Harris lost. Every state you're seeing here that's highlighted, except for Georgia, had a Democratic down-ballot candidate running either for Senate or governor. And every one of these down-ballot Democratic candidates, except for Bob Casey in Pennsylvania, won, while Harris lost. We saw ticket splitting like I don't think I've ever seen ticket splitting in a presidential election like this before. I really haven't. There were no Kamala Harris coattails. Okay, so looking at this map, Georgia is a key swing state. No down-ballot Democratic candidates that year. Above that, and she lost Georgia, Biden won Georgia. Okay, above this, you have North Carolina. Josh Stein, the Democratic candidate for governor, wins North Carolina, but Harris lost. Biden didn't win North Carolina, but it is considered a swing state because Obama won it in 2008. Above North Carolina, we now go to the proverbial blue wall. In Pennsylvania, Senator Bob Casey, the Democratic incumbent, lost an incredibly close race to Dave McCormick. It was incredibly close. Harris lost Pennsylvania as well. In Wisconsin, Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin got reelected, but Harris lost Wisconsin. Michigan, well, Democrat Elisa Slotkin gets elected to the Senate while Harris loses Michigan. Down in Arizona, Ruben Gallego, the Democratic candidate for Senate, wins the seat. Harris loses Arizona. And in Nevada, Democratic incumbent Jackie Rosen is reelected, but Harris becomes the first Democratic candidate to lose Nevada in 20 years. Now, you're looking at Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Okay? Harris lost all those swing states. Biden in 2020 only lost North Carolina. And the down ballot candidates, there wasn't any in Georgia. There were no down ballot candidates in Georgia. The only down ballot candidate who lost was Casey in Pennsylvania. You might remember I predicted all those results except Bob Casey and Kamala Harris. The autopsy, the Roots Nation autopsy, makes a lot of conclusions based on cold, hard data, facts. And they come to conclusions that I drew from my gut right after the election. The Roots Nation autopsy says Harris lost young voters by appealing to the donor class, campaigning with billionaire Mark Cuban, who, in the final stretch of the campaign last year, got the word out that he convinced Kamala Harris not to campaign on a wealth tax. You might remember an aide to Elizabeth Warren convinced Kamala Harris to promise a wealth tax if she got elected. And then in the final stretch of the campaign, Mark Cuban bragged that he got that Elizabeth Warren aide fired from the campaign and there will be no wealth tax. Well, that resulted in a vicious circle during the last month of the Harris campaign where she was a fundraising juggernaut. She was raising more money from Wall Street than people thought was possible. And the more she raised from Wall Street, the more her message bent towards the big money. Rosenthal from Roots Nation also says Harris lost big among Arab American voters, more of whom voted for Trump than Harris, and he calls it the Gaza effect. There's data to back this up. I'm sure most of you knew this. I didn't. I didn't know how much Biden and Harris and the Democratic Party alienated Arab American voters. I suspected it. I had no idea until I read this autopsy. He writes about how the Democratic Party wouldn't even allow a Palestinian member of Congress or any Palestinian politician to speak at last year's Chicago convention. So I talked about that while it was happening. You have to allow Rashida Tlaib, who is the only Palestinian American serving in Congress, you have to allow her to speak at the Democratic convention. I mean, I said that during the Democratic convention because if you're pragmatic, just for political expediency, forget what's going on in Gaza, just for winning, you need the Arab American vote if you want to win Michigan and Arizona. Arizona has a huge Arab American vote. They didn't let Rashida Tlaib speak. They didn't allow anyone representing the Palestinians to speak at the DNC. I repeatedly said, just from not a moral standpoint, just from a political standpoint, it was ill-advised. Well, that was my instinct. Here are the cold, hard facts from the Roots Nation autopsy, and it's staggering. An 18-point swing. The numbers are in. I didn't know this until I read the autopsy and listened to Ralph Nader talking with Sam Rosenthal. who wrote the autopsy for Roots Nation. An 18-point swing. The numbers are in, and there was an 18-point swing from Arab Americans who voted for Joe Biden in 2020 and then switched to Donald Trump in 2024. So I prepared a graph here. Look at this. I didn't know that Trump got 42% of the Arab American vote to Harris's 41%. I didn't know this until I read the Roots Nation autopsy. Look, 4 years earlier, look at this. Biden gets 59% of the Arab American vote. That's an 18% swing in 2024 in the wrong direction. Finally, Rosenthal's autopsy for Roots Nation, his autopsy of last year's election, concludes progressive populism wins at the ballot box. Let me repeat. Progressive populism wins at the ballot box. He points out that while Harris lost deep red Missouri, voters from that same state, Missouri, had just approved by overwhelming margins amendments that raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour, and they voted for paid sick leave. Kamala Harris was not running on raising the minimum wage. She mentioned paid sick leave, but not enough, which is why in Missouri, she didn't come close to the vote margins that paid sick leave and raising the minimum wage to $15 got. In Nebraska, 75% of voters supported an amendment for paid sick leave. Sam Rosenthal over at Roots Nation in his autopsy points out that the down-ballot candidates last year who staked out progressive positions did better than Kamala Harris. He writes, Democratic candidates who doubled down on economic populism during the campaign substantially outperformed Harris. Notably, two candidates like Gabe Vasquez, he won New Mexico's 2nd Congressional District, and Marcy Kaptur, who represents Ohio's 9th Congressional District. I had her on my show. Rosenthal from Roots Nation goes on to write, quote, two candidates who lost their races nonetheless had the highest percentage point margin, 7.6% points, over the Harris-Walz ticket of any of the Democratic or Independent Senate candidates. In other words, of all the candidates who ran for Senate and outperformed Kamala Harris, the two candidates who beat Harris, the two Democratic candidates for Senate who beat Harris by the largest margin, did it with 7.6 percentage points. They beat Harris by 7.6 percentage points, even though they lost their campaigns, and they were running in red states. They were running as economic populists. The American Prospect reported on this. They talked about Montana Senator John Tester and Nebraska Independent Senate candidate Don Osborne. Both these candidates in red states, they both railed against corporations and wealth inequality. Now, again, Montana is a red state. Tester was a Democrat running for re-election. He was an anomaly. Nebraska is a red state, but they have that blue dot near Omaha. So they have one congressional district that's blue, but Nebraska is a red state. This is why, according to Roots Nation's autopsy, these two candidates for Senate, Tester in Montana and Dan Osborne, who from Nebraska, who ran as economic populists, this is why, despite losing, they did better. They outperformed Kamala Harris in their respective states by much bigger percentages than any other down-ballot Democratic candidate last year, who won. They beat Harris in red states. You can read the autopsy at democratacautopsy.org, and you can hear Ralph Nader's conversation with Sam Rosenthal, who conducted this autopsy. You can hear that on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. Check your local listings or download the Ralph Nader Radio Hour as a podcast. And as always, do whatever Ralph Nader tells you to do. Okay, I want to show you, before I go, I want to show you one final graphic. This is from the American Postal Workers Union, and this is an example, a graph that shows you how economic populism wins at the ballot box. Look at this. So this is by the numbers. Alaska, red state. Voters there voted to ban anti-union captive audience meetings. Voters approved a state constitutional right to abortion last year in 7 states: Arizona, Colorado, Maryland, Missouri, Montana, Nevada, and New York. Well, Arizona and Missouri and Montana are traditionally red states. Nevada was red, at least they voted for Trump last year. Oregon, voters passed a measure to protect cannabis workers' rights to unionize. No surprise there. Voters expanded workers' ability to earn paid sick leave last year in 3 states, all red: Alaska, Missouri, and Nebraska. Voters approved minimum wage increases to $15 per hour in 2 red states, Alaska and Missouri, and voters rejected school vouchers in 3 states, Kentucky, red; Nebraska, red; Colorado, blue. So it's very clear that Democrats can win if they get rid of the David Plouffes and the Tony Wests and listen to people like Bernie Sanders and AOC. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Thank you so much for listening. Please share this episode. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed. Leave a comment. I read all your comments, and I will see you probably tomorrow. Thank you.